Hi everyone, I'm Alex Carpenter.
I'm Elizabeth Van Royen.
And this is the Firestarters Podcast.
1, 2, 3, 4.
In this episode, we talk about some of the opportunities emerging out of climate change and the growing emphasis for more sustainable products. We also talk through how important it is to communicate with consumers so they can make informed decisions. But first, I'd like to introduce you to our guest. Kiarne Treacy is an experienced marketer and founder of sustainablechoice.com, a one-stop digital destination for finding and understanding brands' commitments to environmental sustainability. Let's dive into the show. So welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited.
So the first question is just to give us a bit of scope on what we are going to chat through and where I shouldn't ask questions and can. How would you define your industry for the purposes of this podcast?
I'm going to define the industry as sustainability communications. It doesn't really exist. I mean, some people put us in green tech, some people put us in climate tech. I think we're just a technology company. We certainly don't consider ourselves climate technology because we are supporting climate technologies, but we are not one ourselves. But we are really, our focus is on sustainability communications and helping businesses to communicate. So, yeah. Brilliant.
So within communications is a very big term. Am I correct in thinking that I could would you put communications above marketing or marketing above communications?
From an industry perspective?
Or just from your perspective?
Yeah, I would put communications above marketing. Marketing is something that lives within communications to me. It's a strange one because this industry doesn't exist yet, really. What we're doing is kind of new.
And so within that industry, what are the things that you're excited about and that are changing like right now? Because you've said the industry doesn't really exist and sustainability communications isn't really a thing that's widespread yet.
Yeah.
But what's your take on how is it going to evolve?
Well, I think interestingly, in Australia, we are probably behind a lot of other parts of the world. So I would say I'm going to speak about the Australian landscape specifically. I think that would make more sense. That's the experience that I have. But it's moving incredibly rapidly. We started building our product about a little over 2 years ago. At the time, had a lot of strange looks at me when I was like, "Oh, what's that?" A bit of a hippie product. A lot of people was suggesting. About 6 months ago, the penny dropped, and everybody's like, "Oh, wow, that's what a great idea! Exactly the right time." So, it's moving rapidly. In Australia, we're right at the very beginning. What's exciting? What's exciting to us is that there are government regulations that are coming in. The ACCC has taken a position on how businesses communicate about their sustainability. So where this industry wasn't really established, it is now because, literally 3 weeks ago, the ACCC came out and did a statement on how we communicate about our ESG and our environmental social governance. And they've said, like, this is how you do it right, and this is how you do it wrong, and we're going to crack down on it. So we said, okay, great. Now that somebody has put some sort of formal communication around it, we immediately went straight into development. So we took that statement, we went through it with a fine-tooth comb. We said, how can we align even better to what the government wants us to do? So we've gone and we're in development. In about 4 or 5 weeks, we'll be releasing some updates on our platform to make it even more aligned with the ACCC. So in Australia, the talking at the moment, there's a lot of talk about what businesses should be doing and could be doing. But right now, it's about how they're communicating about it. So it's a hot topic. Sadly, it's often a negative hot topic. So it's often clouded by the term greenwashing, which is really unfortunate because a lot of businesses carry an awful lot of fear about this greenwashing, accusations of greenwashing, of making mistakes. So what's really, really exciting is, and it is a massive opportunity, is also seen as quite a risk at the moment. So we're in this turning point where everybody's sort of treading really lightly.
Is it unusual for the ACCC to come out and tell companies how to communicate about something? That seems a bit strange to me. Is that normal?
Yes. No, that's they're here to make sure that how we communicate is not misleading and deceptive to consumers, and giving us an edge so that we don't have an edge. A business doesn't have an edge by using something that is misleading. And up until now, there has been things like making sure that the nutrition labels are fair and reasonable, that the pricing is fair and reasonable. What they're saying now is don't say, we care about the environment on the front of the pack without giving any explanation, because you're taking an edge over your competitor. When you're walking down a supermarket aisle, you've got 6 seconds to make a decision. You see one with a big green tree on it that says we care about the environment. You go, oh, well, I care about the environment. I'll buy that. Actually, it's an ambiguous claim. It's unsupported claim. And they're saying you can't do that anymore. We're going to start looking at businesses who are making these ambiguous, unsupported claims, and we're going to tell them to stop doing it. So that is a very hot topic right now. And I think what's really important, firstly, what I'll say is about misleading and deceptive communications is that in most cases it's inadvertent. So there are some big organizations and some businesses out there who are trying to find ways to cover what they have done in the past, or particularly sort of 5 or 10 years ago, it's much more substantial. But right now, this deceptive or misleading behavior it's largely unintentional. It's good with meaning well and making mistakes along the way. So this is a transition period for businesses to actually learn how to do it properly. What's good about the ACCC coming out and talking about it is that they've given some sort of framework of what they're going to be looking at. And so there's a lot of businesses, and I talk to them every day, they actually don't know. They're so frightened they're going to do something wrong. They're like, I don't want to talk about it at all. As you said, there's those two good things. The third good thing is that it creates a conversation that we're having mainstream conversations. It's a conversation that's happening when you're standing in the supermarket now, because you're learning, we're teaching consumers, hey, turn the bottle over. What does it say on the back? Are they explaining themselves? Have they got a web page you can go to read all about, the life cycle of this product? So it's creating a healthy conversation, which is far and away the most important thing that we need right now, is an ongoing healthy dialogue. And I think that for me, it's the scariest thing about flinging this word greenwashing around all the time. There's a real big difference between a business who writes, we care about the environment on a package, and without substantiating it, that's greenwashing. But a business who does an article on LinkedIn about a solar farm that they've just built and is being accused of greenwashing because they also still have plastic waste, that's really unfair, because what we're doing is we're silencing those businesses that are making progress. We're silencing them, and when we take them out of the conversation, we excuse them from the conversation. We give them a leave pass from the conversation, and that's the absolute worst thing that we can be doing. And that, I think, I'm really, really passionate and furious about everybody just randomly accusing people of greenwashing, because you're silencing a very, very important conversation.
And I guess that's always going to be the challenge with something that is still new and finding its footing and becoming the norm, is there are going to be a lot of missteps. And, there's while that understanding really comes together, I think it'll be, hopefully the more we talk about it, the more natural it'll be for companies to be more vocal about their ESG practices. And obviously a lot has happened in the last 5 years, but if you fast forward 10 years, what do you see as the industry standard for corporate ESG accountability?
I think that there will be regulations that will come from governing bodies. There will be regulations, so they will come from government, they will come from industries. Industries are leading their own regulations through product stewardship and certifiers, etc. So there will be regulations and standards that need to be met, and then a sort of a level playing field needs to be found. But I can tell you that there are scientists all over the world right now that are trying to figure out what that magical number is, or the traffic light system, or whatever it is that they can say, this product is better than this product, this service is worse than this service. It doesn't exist yet. There is an awful lot of science involved in this, and not all the scientists are in agreement right now. So I think there's quite a process. And I also think one of the things about regulation is that there is something that a lot of people are forgetting about right now, which is personal values. So you might be sitting at a table with somebody who doesn't consume animal products, and somebody who has a zero plastic lifestyle, or somebody who cares about emissions and emissions reduction. Each of those people are looking at products and services differently. So what these regulators might call, the standard, you're also got to take into account that somebody might be like, well, that might be the best one for the environment, but I refuse to consume an animal product. So, that's out for me. So it's going to be a really interesting journey to see where we land. I can tell you that this conversation next year in 2025 and in 2030 will be wildly different, because it is moving at 1,000,000 miles an hour right now, which is exciting.
I'm wondering from a small business perspective, like a startup perspective, there's a lot of change. And with that, all that change creates opportunity. And so like you've created the communications tool, but I'm wondering what other little things do you see over the next 5 years where because of the shifts that we're seeing, actually small opportunities will pop up because of those shifts?
There are so many opportunities. And I think we have the global goals, right? What we're trying to achieve here is we're fighting climate change, we're fighting poverty, we're trying to fight, inequalities. We're looking at protecting biodiversity. So there's all of these key things that need to be done. There's some incredible tech startups out there. I'm in a group with a bunch of amazing climate tech startups, and watching some of the work that they're doing in the climate change space and in emissions reduction and measurement and reporting. So there is so much opportunity, and we need more. Technology will drive this change. Technology will drive whatever it is that takes us to 2030 to get to where we need to go. And businesses are craving it. And this conversation, the more demand there is, then they say, okay, well, what do we do next? So you've got business owners and teams that are saying, okay, well, we need to go and make our clients happy. We need to be a more sustainable company. What are we going to do? So that's okay. So how does the startup landscape solve that? Through consulting, help them know what to do. Through tools and measurement and reporting to help them to be able to figure out what it is that they've actually achieved. Through technologies that they can replace things that they've done, their production processes, their packaging, their technology within their businesses, energy consumption. So this is where technology has to come in and make it easy for businesses to do what their customers expect them to do. And to be honest with you, that's where my head was at a few years ago. I was thinking, I want to start something that solves a problem for businesses who inevitably need to transition. Initially, my thought process was to net zero, but I think there's so much more to it. We've evolved a lot from there. So thinking about solving problems for businesses, because businesses that have this massive impact on the environment and have money to pay for products and services and technologies. I think that's probably a really exciting space. There's a lot of science involved. Some of it doesn't require as much science as others, but I think that there's so much exciting opportunity in there. And not only do you get to be a startup that's building something cool, but you can actually do it with a good conscience and know that you're, contributing to a better planet and to a better future. That's a really nice way to do business.
Absolutely. And I think, you also see in the last 12 months, the number of investment funds that have popped up specifically for sustainability focused startups has been, I guess, not surprising, but just that has been such a focus for this past, 12 to 18 months. I've found really interesting. It seems like every other week on the AFR, there's a new article about another, specific fund that's popped up. So it's really good to see that investors are also realizing that they need to put more money into this space if we're going to drive change from startups.
It is, and yes, we're seeing a lot more of them. Even just this year alone, there's a lot more of them, and I think it's happening with investors. It's also happening in really large organizations as well. Like there are a lot of organizations right now that their procurement process has really strict regulations within it because they know, again, that their investors want to see that as well. So it's not just the investment funds, but it's also existing investors saying, okay, well, now we have an expectation that you're going to meet a certain standard, whether or not there's a government regulation in place. It's not there yet. It's coming, but it's not there yet. So in the meantime, we're going to regulate you and say, you need to be looking at your procurement practices. And I'm seeing it even things like marketing companies. So, I've had clients who said, we won't buy a billboard anymore because it's not good for the environment unless they can show us that, they can confirm that this is a net zero billboard, which there are some. So things like that. So it seems that we're paving this way almost in spite of a government that completely ignored it for 25 years, which is good because, again, healthy conversation, and there's more of these conversations happening every day.
And so you mentioned, the issue around companies being maybe hesitant to talk about sustainability because of the fear of, being labeled a greenwasher. What other hurdles to adoption do you see happening in this industry? What do you think are going to be the roadblocks for mass adoption?
So the greenwashing applies to when they talk about it, but there's so much that has to happen before they talk about it. And there are hurdles. Firstly, not knowing where to start is pretty scary. There's a lot of fear around, what happens when we start and we're not good enough. It's kind of like an all or nothing. There's a lot of businesses going, next year we're going to start that because this mountain, it feels like this enormous mountain to climb. And the cost. There are costs involved. They are inevitable, unavoidable costs now. A couple of years ago, having a sustainability manager in the business or an ESG manager in the business was very, very rare. Now, in most mid to large organizations, it's standard, and there's so many jobs on Seek for it. And that's often the person that my business speaks to. And those people have existed in their roles for 6, 12 months, 18 months. A lot of people have come from the same business, but they were in a slightly different role. They worked in quality or they worked in legal. And so it's like this entirely new industry, from a jobs perspective as well, not just from an entrepreneurial perspective, but just getting into that ESG space and studying it, being able to be that person that leads within a business is a huge opportunity. But the hurdle around knowing that you have to pay somebody to do that work, and then you have to pay for those solar panels, and that you have to pay for those trees to be planted, and that the compostable packaging is twice as expensive as the previous packaging. It's quite daunting. It's really daunting. And there's a lot of these businesses that simply just couldn't do that. They actually couldn't transition to that packaging because they'd have to close their doors. So, and it's an education thing as well. They don't know where to start, but also we don't know what we want as consumers. There's some basic things we can understand. Things like no plastic. That's one of those things that we can tend to understand. Quite often, that no plastic is not actually the answer to a more environmentally conscious product, but it's the one that consumer most resonates with. So then you've got a business that has to make that decision. Do I do what my consumers will resonate with, or do I go and do something that's actually going to reduce our emissions substantially, but they're not going to get it and they're not going to be impressed by it? So it's really challenging. There's a lot of scary stuff out there. It's actually not that cloudy if you get an expert and sort of sit down with environmental consultants, of which we've got quite a few partners in that space, and they take that burden off you, just like you'd get a consultant for your product development or your marketing or anything like that. There's just no reason why businesses shouldn't be going out and seeking expert advice, because they take that fear away and they show you how you can do it. And it's not always expensive. It often is, but it's not always. There's a massive opportunity cost here. So we need to be thinking about the upside, and it might be hard to see, because what will happen is businesses that are doing the right thing for people and planet will probably survive, and those that aren't will slowly die off. So they may not grow. They're not going to sit there and go, wow, we got, a 2x ROI on that project because now we've doubled in size. Just pure survival is what they should be measuring over the next 10 years. So, not having an ROI for at least 2, 3, 5 years, that's a very challenging decision to make if you're a business owner, or if you're a business leader who may not be in that role in 3 or 4 or 5 years, which is, again, why we have so many issues with our governments.
I'm curious to look at it from the other side for a second, because we've got, I'm sure there's a bunch of young budding entrepreneurs who are desperately wanting to do something in the climate change space, and it sits on their heart heavily. And I see a lot of people go, well, I'll just create X company, but do it well and do it so that there's no bad environmental impact. And then they think that is enough of a competitive advantage in the marketplace to actually win. And I've seen this, and I've done this a few years ago as well, where I made that assumption and then launched the company thinking that, my social goals would be enough to carry the marketing and that it was just going to take off. And then you get wrecked pretty quickly, realizing that marketing is not so simple. You can't just have an environmental message, even if it is true, and that'll actually win the day. So I'm curious on your take of how do new companies, let's say they identify a lagging company that is just not taking these issues seriously, and they think they could disrupt that company and do something similar and take their customers away from them. What should they be thinking about how important this message is to their whole business, and especially in succeeding in that marketing space?
It's a really challenging question, because I'm not sure that leading with sustainability for a small business is an edge anymore. And I think it's an expectation that new businesses, young businesses of any sort, whether it's product or service or technology, for me, my business is 2 years old. We could make every decision with people and planet in mind from day one, on how we treat our people, on how much paper we use, on whether or not we have all these things. We get to decide that now so consciously. So I don't know that there's much of an edge in this anymore. Sadly, I wish that I wasn't going to be saying that. My suggestion is, and I felt exactly the same way. I sat down 3 years ago thinking, I want to do something that's environmentally conscious. Having a marketing background as I do, coming from a corporate sector, I was thinking about, rather than trying to compete with these organizations that have these gaps, and this is my personal point of view. This isn't standardized advice. This is how I feel. But my point of view is, rather than taking them on, I decided to try and fill their gaps for them, thinking of a service that they needed to help them to do better. And one of their problems was communicating. So I thought, maybe I can get in here and help them to communicate. So my thoughts on a young budding entrepreneur who wants to change industry, go for it. If you've got the backing that you need and something unique enough that you can shake up the market, you need to have something more than sustainability, I believe. But think about those businesses that have these flaws and what technology you could build for them, or that could actually help them, because they've already got the mass market advantage, right? They've already got the consumption. So if you come up with the packaging that will help to said business, there's lots of other businesses that can buy that packaging from you, for example. If you come up with technology to report on emissions reductions in a unique way, which there's thousands of them coming up every day. It'd be really interesting to see which ones win. I'm not actually sure. There's really varying ways that this is being done, from accounting platforms to crypto to all sorts of things. So I'm really interested to see where this is going. But my recommendation is to, if you're building the business to have a social and environmental impact, think about filling the gaps of the businesses that are already established and get in there and win them as your client, and that's how you win, as opposed to, well, I don't like the way they make that soft drink, so I'm going to go and make my own soft drink, because it'll be very, very hard to try and beat them, unless you've got bucket loads of money behind you.
And so you're obviously tackling the communications aspect of these issues. What other problems have you seen that you think still need to be solved? You know, if you weren't working on this, what else would you be going after?
There are so many. I think there is some science that needs to be clarified for consumption by just everyday consumers, everyday people. So I think somebody needs to figure out how we can solve the what is actually better. Like what is biodegradable, and is that actually better? And what about when they said we've removed our plastic? Why is that actually better? And would it have been better if they had just shipped it more locally? And so there is, and this is actually what I thought I was going to be solving a few years ago when I started this. I was like, okay, we're going to figure out which one the best product is, and then we will tell them, and then they'll buy the better one. And I'm not the only person on this earth that thought they could do that. There are some businesses out there, by the way, some awesome tech startups. There's a couple in Australia, one I can think of in Amsterdam, that are building these tools where they can actually assess all of the life cycle of a product, all the different things, and be able to actually tell you holistically whether or not it's a better choice than another. So I think, and I don't know the answer to what I would definitely be doing, but I think decoding the sustainability space is still open for the taking. And there's plenty out there that are trying to do it. I haven't seen anybody absolutely nail it yet, and I think that it's going to take a long time. But it needs to be decoded because we need to make the science a mainstream thing. And so that's probably where my head would be at. And still, I probably still think that if we get to the point where the science catches up and we have access to it, we would possibly be transitioning into that space eventually. And I'm not talking about in the next couple of years, I'm talking 5 or 10 years. But that's where I'd like to be, because we need to make it easier for people.
I'm curious, you mentioned at the start of this, the ACCC's decision to put guidelines around how to communicate your sustainable practices. There's a big shift in the macro level for Australia, at least. I'm wondering, at that kind of level, are there any other things that you can see over the next 5 to 10 years that are coming down the pipeline or could happen that are big, which will pivot businesses and industries from that macro lens?
In short, the answer is absolutely yes. Do I know what that's going to be? I don't think so. I think that governments must put mandates around, I'm talking about the ACCC from a consumer perspective, right, which is that they're talking to you about what you must be saying to be honest and transparent. But I think the other side of that is that the government will mandate what your actual practices need to be. There will be minimum standards of practice of environmental impact. There should be emissions standards already, right? That's definitely coming. So I think by 2030, without a doubt, there will be government mandated regulations from a best practice perspective. And if you're not doing it now, you better get started, because the issue will be that if you wait for regulation, then you'll be miles behind, and then you'll hit that wall of, oh my God, it's so expensive. We have to cough up all of this cash right now and do it. The government's going to give us 18 months to get into gear, or 2 years, and it's just not going to be enough time. So I think expecting that there will be regulations around good social governance, good environmental governance, I would absolutely expect that to be coming. And I can't even imagine a world where that's not on its way.
I've also got to think like there's been some recent, movements in this space, and I'm thinking of Patagonia in particular, but where they've put such an emphasis on this subject, and their communications has been consistent for an incredibly long time. That brand stood for those things way before it was popular, and they've really gone way out on the edge and continuing to push those boundaries. If you're someone, like a sanitarium or an Arnott's or something, and you're just like, but we're just trying to get by, guys. Like, geez, our profit margins are pretty thin. And then Patagonia's gone ahead and like, oh, this is what sustainability means. And they're like, how am I meant to compete with that? Like, it's such a high bar. How are we going to make those helpful steps rather than aiming for the perfection, perhaps?
It's so interesting because it was such an incredible thing that he did. But also immediately my first thought was, oh, great. Okay, so that's going to set the standard now for what is good. And not the whole world couldn't operate that way where we just, giving our businesses to environmental conservation. It just doesn't work that way, right? So I think it's amazing and it's leadership and it's brilliant, but trying to compare ourselves against something largely unattainable for 99% of businesses, this is where I say we need to be embracing progress over perfection, because that level of perfection is almost impossible. And I wouldn't be looking too closely at that if I was miles and miles behind. I would be thinking about, okay, what's my first step here? Or, I'd like to think that we don't have any mainstream businesses that are just taking their first steps. I know for a fact that we do, but it shouldn't be the first step, right? It should be, okay, what's the next step on the journey? And I think that the thing that businesses need to be unafraid of is that every day is getting better. There's more technology, there's more information, there's more conversation. So if you're feeling nervous about it today, you're not going to get more and more nervous. There'll be more and more things available to get better. There'll be more things you can read. There'll be more people you can meet. There'll be more technologies you can plug into. The technologies will get cheaper, more accessible. So I think collectively, this process will get easier and it will get less expensive. And to an earlier point and an earlier question about, what could budding entrepreneurs be thinking about in this space as well is, how could we help them make these changes less expensive? And, that's kind of, if you're trying to think of what's the problem I'm trying to solve here, or how could I do it in a way that is less expensive or less time consuming for a business to do? Because again, they're not getting an ROI straight away. So a lot of these businesses just cannot justify doing it.
And I suppose as from your journey in particular, I know it's never a straightforward walk in the park. So like any advice for, these entrepreneurs that really want to dent this problem of all of the environmental damage that's being done and they, going to go down that path. They feel it's important for them to go down that path and what would your advice be now you've, already gone down there and they're following you?
I'll give you this advice from the perspective of somebody that's been watching a lot of climate tech startups win and a lot fail, and watching the journey and sitting amongst them and having the conversations, is that, and this isn't going to sound like a very good thing, but the reality is that having a good heart and wanting to do good isn't enough. You need to be thinking commercially about who's going to buy it. And, back to, your conversation about making a product that's, more environmentally sound and nobody wants to buy it because it's cheaper just to go down to the supermarket and get something else. So my advice would be to have a look at who your customer is and thinking about, if you're talking to consumers right now and you want them to buy shoes from you that are made entirely sustainably, when most shoe shops now are making a better version of their existing products or have options in there, it's an uphill battle. So from my perspective, my advice would be, don't necessarily go and try and take them on. Try and think about how they can pay you to improve their products, how they can pay you to improve their business, because that you're making their business easier, better, more environmentally sound. You're making it easier to track, easier to calculate, better technologies, easier to transport something, less emissions when you transport it, etc., etc. I would be thinking that way rather than I want to make a product that's better than that soft drink bottle, because that is an uphill battle that you'll most likely lose. Again, I want to preface that's my personal opinion, and it's not business advice collectively. There's so many different ways you can look at this, and particularly depending on how much money that you have backing you. But the way that I see it right now is, if you want the world to be a better place from a consumption perspective, look at what's already being consumed. Don't necessarily go out and make more things to consume.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Thanks for listening. If this episode fanned your flame, we'd love to help. Just go to guildoфentrepreneurs.com. We are a decentralized community ensuring that every entrepreneur is supported, and we'd love to see you there. Until next time, bye.